This is the presentation for the Introduction to the Floriculture Industry and Production Materials, as created and narrated by Miles Gennard. So what we're going to talk about today, first off, is what is floriculture, followed by floriculture in the marketplace, types of crops, types of markets, a little bit about interior scapes, and then wrapping up with some production materials with seeds, cuttings, plugs, and plug trays. So what is floriculture exactly? Floriculture is a section of horticulture industry that is focused on growing flowering or ornamental foliage crops for decorative value. Floriculture in the United States is a $4.1 billion industry. This slide, with data collected by the USDA Agricultural Survey from 2011, shows just how that money is split up among the different types of crops. As you can see, the largest crop is the bedding plants with 38% of the industry, followed by potted plants with 19%. Coming up next, we will discuss each type of floriculture crop in a little more detail. Those crops are bedding crops, herbaceous perennial plants, potted crops, foliage plants, cut flowers, and cut cultivated greens. First off, are bedding crops. This is a crop that is produced with the intention of using the plants in a flower bed or ornamental display. They are most often find their way into mixed containers as well. Even though bedding plants make up the largest part of the industry, remember 38%, they have a fairly short growing season, which is usually from January to June depending on the climate and location. This is because there's a high demand for annuals in the spring and the early summer. Bedding plants are usually started directly from seed, but are produced from cuttings as well as other methods. Some examples of bedding crops include spring and summer annuals such as petunias, violets, impatiens, and some vegetables. So here's a couple images of some bedding crops. We got some petunias on the upper left and lower left, and then some commonly called geraniums in the middle, but pelargoniums, and then some violets or violas over there on the right. Next up are herbaceous flowering perennials. These plants are, again, grown for their ornamental value, but unlike annuals, they will persist every year based on their hardiness zone. Their growing season is longer than bedding plants, but there is still the same push to buy them in the spring and early summer. They also only usually flower at a specific time during their season, opposed to the annuals, which usually flower all season long. Some examples of herbaceous flowering perennials include phlox, bleeding hearts, coneflower, basically anything that you can think of that you have out in your garden that's going to come back every single year. Here we can see some images of herbaceous flowering perennials. On the top right, we have lavender with white poppies below that and some campanula on the left. So with the perennials, I've been talking a little bit about the hardiness zones, so I thought I would give a brief overview of what that actually means. This is the new hardiness zone map from 2012. As you can see, different regions of the country are shaded different colors, and there is a corresponding key on the right. The map shows the average minimal temperatures for an area and designates a number. Plants are measured by the minimum temperature they can handle during the winter and still remain vigorous in the following year. For example, a plant with a hardiness of 5A will thrive in zone 5A and presumably in zones with a rank higher than 5, but will likely not survive within the zones of 1 through 4. So that brings us to potted crops. Potted crops are usually flowering annuals, perennials, vegetables, or herbs that are grown for use in decorative pots or containers. At 19%, it is the second largest crop in the floriculture industry in the U.S. These plants have a variable growing season based on the type of plant and are usually more expensive to produce because the decorative pot and plant are sold by the grower together. Some examples of these are poinsettias, which are obviously grown in the winter for the holiday, mums, which can be grown for the fall or sometimes also in the spring, Easter lilies, which are obviously for Easter, and then shamrocks, which are grown and sold around St. Patrick's Day in March. Here's a couple images of some potted crops that you might see. There's also some specialty sort of plants that you see below on the left. And then there's some lilies and some summer flowering annuals. Our next crop to discuss is indoor foliage plants. These plants are grown with the intended use of display indoors, but they may be used outdoors as well in warmer climates or during warmer seasons. The plants are referred to as foliage plants because either they do not flower indoors or the flowers are insignificant. They are usually chosen for color, shape, or otherwise interesting leaves. These plants are grown in warmer climate states such as Florida and California because of the longer growing season and ability for the plants to be grown outdoors. Some examples include bromeliads, ferns, philodendrons, pothos, and more. Here are some images of examples of some foliage crops. Next up, we have cut flower crops. This crop is exactly what it sounds like. These plants are usually field or greenhouse grown and harvested for their showy flowers. In most cases, the plants are grown through a rigid grid that both supports the plant and allows for ease of harvest. At only 10% of the U.S. floriculture industry market, cut flower production is relatively small domestically. Internationally, the cut flower industry is large, but most production takes place offshore in Central and South America. This is because the climate and average day length are much more conducive to producing the crops year-round, and the cost of labor is much cheaper. But do not be discouraged. There is a specialty market in the United States for local, sustainable, and organic cut flowers. Here are some examples of some cut flowers. On the left, I have an image from an organic farm here in Ohio of cut flowers that were grown out in the field. In the middle is a mix of organic and local and shipped in from offshore. And on the right is from a major retailer, so they're most likely all offshore purchases. Our last crop to discuss is cultivated greens. As with cut flowers, these plants are usually grown and harvested for use in bouquets and decorations. However, unlike cut flowers, the plant's harvestable unit is its foliage. They are the leaves and generally green filler in flower bouquets. The crops are usually produced in warmer climates, much like the other foliage crops mentioned earlier, and are sold wholesale to florists and designers and sometimes directly to consumers. Here are a few images of some foliage crops. In the middle is the classic fern. On the left, you'll see the foliage growing through a grid, which I discussed earlier with the cut flowers. And then on the right is actually from that same organic farm in Ohio that I mentioned earlier. And this is actually basil. So it does flower, but it's used more for its foliage. And it also adds a little bit of extra scent to that bouquet. So we know about the crops, but what happens next? Generally, as a grower, most of the crops produced will be sold at wholesale to many different types of markets. But there are exceptions where the grower sells directly to the consumer, in such cases as farmers markets and grower garden center operations. Other than that, the crops are purchased by garden centers, retail florists and designers, landscapers, and mass market stores, which are your big box stores. Another place for your plants to end up may be in an interior-scape. Interior-scaping is a growing industry in the United States that incorporates a designed plant layout in offices, hospitals, and retail malls. The design can range from just a few potted plants, which would be ideal for an office, to a large elaborate display, which is more appropriate in a large interior space of a mall. Most of the plants used will be foliage plants, but on a large scale, trees and shrubs may also be used. Here are a few images of some interior scapes. The bottom two are in a much larger atrium space of an office building, and so incorporate a much larger, elaborate display. And the image above is just a couple of pots in a hallway and an old estate. So we're going to wrap up with a discussion on a few common production materials, starting with media. Media is any substrate or mixture that is used as a medium for plant production or propagation. Common types of media include soilless media, which consists mostly of peat. There's also perlite and vermiculite, which are expanded volcanic rock, as well as rock wool. Because peat is a limited resource, however, rice hulls and cocoa fiber have been experimented with and have found their way into some commercially produced media. Moving on, we'll discuss three types of propagules: seeds, cuttings, and plugs. I'm discussing these because they are the most common way that a product will be received by a grower or produced by a propagator. First off, we have seeds. Seeds, as you know, come in all shapes and sizes. This, however, can inhibit or enhance the ease of sowing by hand or machine. Pelletizing seeds ensures an even and easier way to handle seeds for both machine and hand sowing. Small seeds such as begonia, which are like a powder, are also pelletized to make them larger to prevent loss. Here we see two images of pelletized seeds. On the right is the begonia seeds that I was talking about. What the image is showing are the pelletized seeds on the top with the sponge layer separating the raw seeds on the bottom. As you can see, the seeds on the bottom are very fine textured and would be almost impossible to plant by hand. And then on the right, you can see the different shapes and sizes of seeds that are pelletized. As you can see, for easy identification, the seeds may also be color-coded. The process of pelletizing seeds includes adding inert powder and adhesives layer by layer to the seed until the desired shape or size is achieved. This technique is similar to how a jawbreaker candy is made. Sometimes the powder can be enhanced with nutrients and mycorrhizae to aid the plant during germination and to help it grow. Next up is cuttings. Cuttings can be purchased or shipped either as rooted or unrooted. In both cases, the cuttings are usually packed in perforated bags to allow for some airflow, but to prevent desiccation or drying out. It's recommended that unrooted cuttings must be stuck immediately into media upon arrival for best results. And rooted cuttings may arrive bare root or already rooted into media. In the image below, we see some unrooted succulent cuttings. Another way that plants are grown and shipped is by use of plugs. Plugs are rooted cuttings or seedlings that have been sown into a tray of individual cells. Plug trays are a good first step when propagating as they allow for easy transplanting into larger pots later in production. Plug trays are named for the number of plugs that they contain, such as 105s, 384s, and 800s. In this last slide, we see plug trays that range from 105 to 800, which is the most that you can get today in market. Thank you for listening to this lecture, and if you have any questions, please direct them to me, Miles Gennard, at the following address, gennard.14@osu.edu. Thank you.